So DP, I suppose we should introduce ourselves.
It am true. How would you introduce yourself?
Hello, I am Darwin Torres. Not a scientist. Just a simple friend. Whom here going to ask questions about autumn, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
and how all that works.
Give it. Sorry. They're stealing my things, hon. They're stealing my things. Don't you dare.
They steal all your things.
It's true.
Yes.
But yes. So, hope you all like my costume. My very. I worked so hard on the costume, don't you know? Don't you know?
And
So,
what are we drinking today?
What are we drinking today? I think this is a gin and juice. At least it tastes like one.
I'm having a nice cup of coffee.
Oh, it's a rum and juice. Even better. See?
I stayed up quite late last night, so just a regular old coffee for me will do the trick.
All right, so right we're here. So this is our potion menu, right? So we have to grow the different ingredients to make the potions. And so I have to give them priorities, right? So first priority is the love potion, and then there's the poison potion, and then there's the good luck charm. And then from that we get the money. And then I have my sweet little chicken here. And as things grow, I harvest. And then once I got the money, I buy more plants.
This is a DP game. It's spooky and planty.
How did you know? How'd you know?
Pasta says that he's got a single malt 12-year on sale.
Ooh.
And
Oh,
that sounds quite nice. I'd like a cup of that. Or a cup, a swig. I don't know. What's the terminology for having a drink like that?
A dram if we want to be really fancy.
I can go for a dram. It's a ooze. We got ooze on chat now too.
Yay, ooze! Oh, look at this sad kitty. Like you go up and it's like, oh, thank you. And it's like, but I hate it. Look at this rain.
But that's fine. Ooze is saying 3 fingers, no ice. I'll take it, sure.
My chicken got bigger since I've been feeding it, see? Nice.
Hello, Faison.
Hello. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Spooktober. I dressed like a pirate, even though it's not Halloween yet. I'm ready.
You can't see me, but I'm gonna go put on my hat. This will be for me.
Just for me, just so you all know. Oop, I got a snake. Yay!
But DP, I
Yes.
guess we should have a conversation about plants and whatnot, and how does the autumn work exactly?
How the autumn work?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. This is what I know. From my perspective, the plants are green, then they start turning different shades of orange and yellow. Eventually, they start dying, and what confounds me is, how do the plants survive through winter?
Well,
especially when there's no leaves. When I suppose those things are for capturing sunlight, right?
Right. So I should probably tell you that they no die. They're not dead. They sleeping.
They hibernate.
They're hibernating. That's right. So first we should probably establish. So we are talking specifically about what are called deciduous trees. Okay, so that's any tree which goes through these stages where it loses its leaves. Right. Now, there are conifers or coniferous trees which stay evergreen all the time. And I should also probably let people know that the bats, go away. That only about 13% of all plants change color in the fall. global.
13%?
13%.
Ethan left a note in chat saying deciduous equals drops leaves.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It am true. And of that 13%, only 16% turn red.
Oh, interesting.
Yes.
So you're more likely just to see yellow and brown leaves,
Yep.
and unlikely to see red.
Yep, yellow and oranges and stuff. And there is a and I will and I will get into why that is in a little bit. But so now, as I said, this is on a global sort of scale. So it's like most things don't drop their leaves. Okay. It won't give me the spiky plant. Ooh, I can't get a tree though, guys.
Get a spooky tree.
Spooky tree. So most don't drop their leaves. Okay, that's just it is an adaptation for plants which are up in wintry sorts of places. And so the thing is, they are not dead, they are just sleeping, right? And so there's actually somewhat of a joke that I've seen of there was a comic where it showed like some evergreen trees, and then it showed like some like maple tree or whatever, and it's just like, man, he's just so lazy, you know, like during this part of the year, and he's like, yeah, but wouldn't you love to be able to take a nap like that? I mean, like, damn.
I mean, my question is, how do they fall into hibernation like that? What's the process where these plants fall into that mode?
This is the best part. No one really knows.
Oh.
It's been that way for thousands of years, as far as and everyone loves the fall colors, and still no one can really decide how they decide and when it happens and why.
Oh wow, interesting.
But so there's a couple competing theories. And so those competing theories are, it has to do with what we call photoperiod, which is the length of the day. So as days get shorter, that will signal to the plant like, hey, you know, it's starting to get that time of year, right? And there used to be a thought that, oh, it had to do with temperature, but then they'll still change color even if there is I don't want to do it, guys.
The chunky chicken.
I don't want to sacrifice the chicken.
Do it.
I
do
know.
it.
I'm going to do it. I sacrifice the chicken. I know. Ah! But it's probably got to do, see, what happens is the ghost actually helps me harvest things.
Ah.
So that is the benefit there. So I can actually get myself a new chicken if I want.
And then you can get a bunch more to help you harvest. Interesting.
Indeed. Ooh, I can get the big spiky one. Oh boy. This is not symmetrical at all. Oh well, I'm not paying attention. Anyway. Ah, that bat stole my leaf.
Plants ain't symmetrical.
It's true, they're not. So what will happen is that there's sort of a combination, and I actually listened to, a good podcast to listen to for a lot more detail on this would be the Field Guides. They did, their second episode ever was on fall colors, but they also did one on autumn and how autumn is one of the least studied seasons when it comes to phenomenon, and a lot about it that we don't quite understand. Don't you take my honeycomb. Don't you dare.
Is there a reason why it's not studied much more?
We're not really sure. We think there might be somewhat of a bias just because it only occurs, like the color changing only occurs in particular like climates. and well as there seems to be a bias towards spring, and we think that just has to do with with humans being like, oh, it's been winter so long, oh, I can get outside, oh, you know. And versus when it gets colder, everyone's just like, oh, I want to be inside and I don't want to be outside. And so they just don't go out there and get data.
That's fair. That makes sense. They're like, oh, it's so nice out. I guess I'll go outside and do this thing.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And or it's the, even though it is really cold out early spring, they're like, oh, I've been stuck in my living room for so long, you know. I need to get out of here. Yeah, and so go ahead.
Well, I was about to say we grandstand that we're so wonderful people and whatnot, but we still have faults of our own. It's when it comes to things like that, we still are animals in the inside.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. It's really funny to me that, especially when I talk about sort of implicit biases in different. It's one of the the different implicit biases in research, right? Why it's there are always where it's almost all funding goes to medical research and medical research about humans. Duh. Right? it has to do with that, you know. It doesn't have anything to do with and it's oh well, is it because this is more valuable or whatever? And I'm like, and we actually have no concept for what will be valuable and what won't be. It's just that we have implicit biases to prioritize anything that has to do with humans or to benefit humans, you know. So, and the next is anything that has to do with animals, because we anthropomorphize animals, right? And we can relate to them better. And anything that's not an animal, like plants, like microbes, like anything that isn't cute and that's an animal is
we tend to ignore.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yep,
you are correct. So that's why, as I said, that there's this phenomenon where it's like the leaves change colors every year. We still don't really know why or how. It's only happened the entirety of human beings' existence, but it's fine.
Everyone looks outside and they're like, somebody else will figure that out, right?
It's pretty. It's pretty. It's fine. How's it work? Nobody knows.
Well, okay, so that's a process. Well, generally speaking, we don't know how the process happens or how it necessarily happens. But do we know how or the plants or the leaves change color?
Yes. So, what induces it is still up for debate. As said, it is most likely photoperiod, which is the length of the day, right? And then there was a thought that it had to do with temperature, but basically we found now that it's probably temperature has to do with the intensity of the color, but not that it will change necessarily. Because you can have a very warm winter and still get color changes. But how it happens is that the chlorophyll that's in the leaf, the green stuff. So first I should say chlorophyll is a very expensive molecule to make. Because it is involved in capturing sunlight and helping fix carbon from the air. So you have, so for each chlorophyll molecule, there are 3 nitrogens. Now, nitrogen's an element, and that we get that from the soil. The thing is that nitrogen, plants only get nitrogen from having symbiotic relationships with either fungus or bacteria. And so because of that, every chlorophyll molecule, because nitrogen is hard to get and is scarce, is very precious. Okay. And so because it's very precious, the plant wants to keep as much chlorophyll as it can. Now, as it gets colder, the reason that plants lose their leaves, it's actually sort of and there's somewhat of debate on how this is affected on climate change. As the days get shorter, there's not trying to upkeep this expensive organ, right? Gives you diminishing returns, basically. Like, it's more expensive to have the leaves out, and they're more likely to get damaged because of the cold and weather and stuff and not work as well. So
I see. Past a certain point, the tree is like, you know what? Let's just start pulling these things, and then eventually just start shifting and changing the color, and then it just drops it completely.
Right. And
it's just a slow process.
Yes. So what happens is that the chlorophyll doesn't get degraded or go away. It actually gets absorbed into the trunk. Okay? So that's why the green disappears.
Gotcha.
So they try to keep the chlorophyll as much as possible. What remains, the oranges and the yellows, are always there. You just don't see them because the chlorophyll's so bright. Those are called carotenoids. So that's like your, give me the flower, you bet. Those are your beta carotenes, right? Like you get like in carrots, right? And tomatoes and things of that nature. And those also help with photosynthesis and help absorb light, but their main use is sunscreen.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, they are protective from UV.
Mm-hmm.
So they're a natural sort of sunscreen. And so that actually, so the leaves, as they're pulling chlorophyll out, will continue, those carotenoids will still help have some photosynthesis, if that makes sense, and help protect the leaf, as basically you're trying to get as much as possible out of it for as long as possible, right? Still capturing as much sunlight as you can. Now,
real quick, Ooze has a question, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
He's asking, Japanese maple always red in the fall.
Yes.
Extra red, but chlorophyll still. Why red, not green?
That actually has to do with a secondary pigment. So there are chlorophyll there, right? But there's another type of pigment called an anthocyanin, which is your red pigment, that is basically shines through. So the chlorophyll still exists, but we just see the red because the red's so much brighter and intense. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Mm-hmm. And so any red trees, and so this is what I mentioned earlier, the anthocyanins are actually not in a tree that turns red. Usually the anthocyanins are actually not there all the time, unlike the carotenoids. So the carotenoids are there all the time, the yellows and the oranges, to help act as a natural sort of sunscreen and protect from UV light, and intense light. And also light intensity shifts and is sort of higher when the air is colder.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that was a thing.
Yep. And so because you get like sort of less cloud cover, and also where, especially in places where the atmosphere is thinner, right, when it's up higher, or in places where it's further north. That's why when you're out in the snow, if you're not careful, and you're, say for example, you're hiking or whatever, and you've got some of your skin exposed, you can have windburn, but you can also get sunburnt from the light coming off the snow, right? I've gotten sunburnt like here during the wintertime.
Oh, I think we have another question.
Yeah.
From Scary Butter Knife. How come leaves turn brown when you roast them, but stay green when you boil them?
Ooh, yeah, that's very interesting. So that has to do with some of the breakdown of the compounds. So the roasting part dries them out and allows more oxygen to get in. And so when that oxygen gets in, it reacts with the chlorophyll and breaks it down. And so then you just see the brown pigment because the chlorophyll's been broken down. versus when you boil them, it's in water. So it's not having any of that oxygen reacting with it because it's underwater, so then the chlorophyll stays put.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
And it's not broken down.
You're also not getting sugar creation.
Yes.
You're not caramelizing your
and
sugar.
you're not caramelizing your sugars either. Yes. So it's instead of so Ethan had said like you have caramelization too when you're roasting because all the sugar that's in the leaf will get caramelized, kind of like if when you're making candy. Versus if it's blanched, like boiled, you don't get that caramelization occurring. And so then you don't get that brown forming. Because the brown is actually a breakdown of those pigments.
That's so interesting. I had no idea that there was so many mechanics when it came to that sort of thing.
Oh yeah, this all has to do with hormones, actually.
Actually, now that you mention it, is it possible for someone like yourself or a scientist in general, are they able to remove the chlorophyll from leaves and have induce that same process? They have them turn yellow into different shades of color?
Oh yeah, I can do that in the lab.
Ooh, that's neat.
Now, so there's several different ways that you can actually have to sometimes if I want to look at, when I worked in a plant cell wall lab, if we wanted to look at particular structures in the leaf, I would have to basically bleach the leaves, which is the treating them with different compounds to remove the chlorophyll, just because the chlorophyll is so bright that you can't see other structures. It's actually one of the reasons that it's really hard to image plants under the microscope, because all of those pigments glow under fluorescent light or under a black light. Because remember that sort of sunscreen?
Right. Beta carotene.
Well, because of that sunscreen, what can happen is it reflects UV light, right? And so because it reflects UV light, you will get the basically what will happen is when you try and image, like take pictures and stuff under a microscope and you're using like UV light or other things like that, it just glows like a freaking rave party.
Interesting.
And so so you have to actually bleach all that stuff out before you even try to look at some of those structures. Or you have to tag your your favorite protein that you want to look at with a different fluorescent protein, a different pigment that will shine under a different wavelength, and then look at it that way.
Oh, scary, crazy. Butterknife also has another question.
Yes.
So do leaves quit producing chlorophyll in the fall, or do they reabsorb it? And if so, are they converting it into something else like starch or sugar? It sounds like they reabsorb it, right? But
yes.
That second question, I have no clue.
So they reabsorb it, and they just sort of keep it. They don't actually convert it or anything. It just goes into storage in the trunk, right? Or in the stem, sort of, and it will be in a different places of what we call the sink tissues, which is where other sugars and stuff are stored. And so, I mean, there's sort of major parts of the plant cell, which you have like the cell wall, right? You have like the nucleus, the different organelles, but you usually have a big vacuole, right? This big sort of inner membrane sac in there, and that's where most storage is. And so in the vacuoles of the cells inside the trunk is where the different chlorophyll will go, because as I said, it's an expensive molecule to make, so one of the reasons that they just store the chlorophyll inside, and then as soon as the buds come out, you notice when the buds come out in the fall, they're already green, right? They don't come out a different color and then turn green. They're already green. And that's because that chlorophyll has already been kept there and has been present. And so one of the reasons is as soon as the photoperiod gets to the right amount where we're getting more sunlight and they start to bud, and when spring happens, it's a combination of temperature and photoperiod. Is that then immediately those leaves can start photosynthesizing, even when they're really, really tiny, right? Because they want to get a jump on it, okay? Because it's,
as soon as they can.
yes, because it's basically like hibernate. Like they are hibernating. They're going into a type of dormancy, and they pull out all the nutrients they can from the leaves, all the nutrients up from the roots, and the roots are still bringing in water and stuff, but they fill the entire trunk with just one, it's basically one single column of water, right? And they go to sleep. And there's still a little bit of photosynthesis that happens even in different parts of the leaf, but it's very minor. Different parts of the tree, but it's very minor. And they also, all that sugar, so they pull out as much sugar as possible, they put that in the trunk, fill it with water, and that sugar is mixed with the water and creates a natural kind of antifreeze.
Interesting. So that keeps it alive and not freezing from the cold.
Yes.
Out of curiosity, because it's storing all of that water, does a tree enlarge? Like, does it engorge because of all that water and then slowly become smaller over the course of the winter?
Depends on the tree. So most of them who have the sort of tougher bark it doesn't appear that way because the inside of the inside is basically one gigantic sponge. Okay.
Sure.
And so you can have a little bit of a swelling, but what you can also hear, and so this will be something fun to do, and you can everybody can look this up, is what's called cavitation bubbles. So in a tree, when it's dormant during the winter time, when it has all of this water in it, and nothing's really moving around, so usually you won't hear anything. So the reason I'm getting into cavitation bubbles is when it's sort of in this unit like this, is you can put your ear up to the trunk and you can hear the air bubbles moving. And they're called cavitation bubbles. And so it'll be like this weird, and so you sometimes hear loud ones where you hear these weird like pops and creaks. That's air moving within the trunk, inside this sort of water column, right? And there's actually recordings of it where you can like stick your ear up to the trunk and hear it basically breathing, right? As the air's kind of coming in through this column. Usually you don't hear that during the year because the water comes up from the roots and goes straight up and then is released out of the leaves as vapor. And so it's just a very single column. So there's no, kind of like a straw, right? And so because of that, there's no air bubbles in there. But when nothing's moving and the plant is still breathing, even at a lower level, because they're not actively photosynthesizing much, you will get these little cavitation bubbles on the inside, and it'll make these weird, like, kind of like popping noises, right? And creaky noises. Yeah.
Yeah, next time I'm outside, I may just stop and just try to listen, just see if I can catch any of those sounds.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna shorten it. The butter knife has another question, or at least another comment potentially. So a lot of fruits and beans have a green period too. Is the skin on these fruits actually photosynthesizing as well, or is it more of a camo to keep it safe?
Little column A, little column B. Actually, when it's green, it's actually really photosynthesizing most of the time, as it's actively growing. When the beans or fruits change color, that is to attract seed dispersers. Okay, and so what happens is that the fruit tissue is called carpal tissue, right? If you're like a tomato, right, or like an apple or something like that, and that swells and changes color because you are wanting to look attractive for an animal to come and eat you and to spread your seeds to other places.
Right.
So any fruit that's like brightly colored usually is going to be dispersed. So like seed dispersed by an animal. That make sense?
Yeah, no, through poop and whatnot.
Mhm.
Like, yeah,
Right.
that makes sense.
And that's because, and so if you are red, you are actually probably more likely to be attracting birds or mammals.
Oh, so different colors attract different sort of creatures.
Mm-hmm.
Ah, I did not know that.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
That's the reason peppers are red.
It's the reason peppers are red. So peppers are dispersed. Chilies, peppers are dispersed by birds, and birds see red really well, see vibrant colors really well, and are attracted to red. But birds also don't have the receptor for capsaicin.
Right.
And so because of that, they can't taste the spicy part. And
It doesn't bother them.
no, because the thing is if a mammal eats a pepper, usually they'll chew and would destroy the seeds, right? So you don't want to be eaten by a mammal. So the capsaicin is an anti-herbivory compound, right? It's to basically be like, don't eat me, because birds swallow their food whole, right? And so then what happens is that the seeds pass through the digestive system and come out unharmed and are dispersed somewhere else, right? Away from the parent.
Sure. I did not know that. I did not realize that colors were significant in that sense.
Oh, and they're very significant for pollination too.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, please go on.
Okay. If you have a big showy flower, right?
Uh-huh.
So what I talk about, so this is the term that botany and plant people use for big, bright, colorful, large flowers, right? We call them showy. And a showy flower is if you are pollinated by an animal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is you're trying to get somebody, but if you have small little flowers, so for example, most people don't realize that like maple trees, when I say that the majority of the plants on Earth that we see are angiosperms, which are flowering plants, that, like a maple tree and oak tree is a flowering plant. They have flowers, right? Like oak trees have flowers, palm trees have flowers, grass has flowers, but you don't notice them because they're little, right? And one, they're very small, and two, they're not very colorful. The reason that they're very small and not very colorful is they're wind pollinated.
Oh, so it gets picked up and then gets dropped other places by the wind. Gotcha.
Right. So they don't have to attract anybody, right?
That makes sense.
It's like I don't need a big showy flower, right? Why would? Because as I said, all of these pigments are expensive to make. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing is you don't make. So plants tend to be very, very efficient about when they do things. So it's like they don't make anything that isn't giving them some sort of benefit.
Okay.
I will expand my garden. Oh boy.
Expand it.
Expanding. Ooh, look at that.
Also, I think they gave an exclamation point in the top left.
Yep. And so because of that, you have these. Yes, so I have new potions. What do we want to prioritize? Do you want to prioritize?
Do these potions just get made automatically once you have the ingredients?
Yes.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Well, more of the more expensive ones, I assume that'll get us more money long term.
Yeah. So here, how about we reprioritize this one, because this one gives us the most money, and then we've been doing pretty good on these. So then I will just go ahead and, whoops, it's not what I wanted. Put that as 1, put that as 4. Put this one as, nope. You get to be 5.
Once you're done with that, I have another question from Butter Knife.
Yes. I feel like I missed one of your questions, Dar, that you had asked me because we got on a tangent from the beginning, but I'm not sure what it was.
It's okay. It's just what we do.
Okay.
So Butterknife is asking, how come we don't get to see new breeds of maple trees or oak trees, like grass? They also made a comment. I assume it's got to do with wind pollination. I have nothing but questions, and that's fine. Yes, more questions.
That is fine. That is absolutely fine. So I guess maybe Scary Butterknife can give us a little bit clarification by what they mean by breeds of trees. A little bit.
Is it possible for well, actually, yeah, that's I'm trying to figure it out as well. Is it possible for different types of maple trees to be bred on their own?
That is possible. I will say that there are several different species. Now, I will say oaks. Oaks are actually a really difficult group to work with because they readily hybridize with each other a lot. And so trying to figure them out genetically is kind of tough because they're really promiscuous. They like breeding with each other all the time. And so there's a lot of things where it's like, especially with new genetic data and sequencing getting a lot easier, and us coming up with new scientists coming up with new computational tools. I'm not one of these computational scientists, everybody. I know just enough to be dangerous. Because I'm a pathologist. I specialize in genetic engineering, and pathology is my thing. So I will try my best, but so just for full disclosure, everyone, I have a degree in genetics, a degree in microbiology, a minor, so it would be an associate's degree in chemistry, and my PhD is in molecular biology and biochemistry. So anything within that realm, I know a lot about, and anything outside of that realm, I know some about. I know more than most people, just because I'm a nerd and a biologist, but I will be absolutely frank on some of this other stuff. I'm a professional plant biologist, microbiologist, molecular biologist, because I am paid to do those things, chemistry, and I am an amateur botanist and naturalist.
And my qualifications is that I have a high school diploma.
You don't need to. Your qualifications are you volunteered and are a good friend of mine and to come keep me company.
Yes. I do want to say thank you, Ethan, for helping out, because he's in the chat also explaining a couple things regarding it. But in that subject, actually, I am kind of curious. So I have to assume, compared to plants, trees are much more difficult to create new strains of, because they're just much bigger, and it takes a lot more time for those things to go through, huh?
Yes. So, in comparison to other plants, trees and breeding is, it's just the scale of things, right? Is the amount of time, because it takes a very long time for them to become sexually mature.
Mm-hmm.
Number one. Number two, they live for so long. So, if I remember correctly, so there's a group, one of my favorite sort of authors and scientists is Dr. Hope Yaren. She is a paleobiologist. And so she studies fossil plants and the processes that created on different plants and species of plants over evolutionary time and things of that nature. And so she wrote in her book, The Lab Girl, which is an excellent, excellent book, and is a really wonderful look into research and how it works, and people, sort of a slice of life into people like her and me, and why we do what we do, and sort of the everyday sorts of struggles and things that go with it. And and she's just an excellent writer. But she had talked about a little bit, and I lost my train of thought. What was it? She had helped with a project looking at sort of large forest populations and some of those things, right? Breeding, hybridization of different conifer species over the course of this one particular forest up in Scandinavia. But like this project has been going on for 70 years.
Shoo!
And it's just generations of scientists, right? That are just volunteering. So, like, for example, so the American Chestnut Foundation, which is a great group that are trying to bring the American chestnut back from extinction, has been working on that project for 30 years. And they're just planting the first new blight-resistant plants this year.
Oh, wow. That's intense. Oh, a couple things I want to bring up to your attention. Ooze said a question, and I just want to bring this up because I think you'll find it entertaining. How does the dropping of temperature affect singing carnivorous plants? And Ethan says they change tempo down to adiago and largo. Like other plants, cold is not their friend.
It's true. That's an excellent answer, Ethan, and you are correct. It's just like we've gone from singing, we've gone from singing like the higher sort of like, scat and jazz and stuff, so now it's more of like a waltz, We're thinking like, think of it as more of like, we're gonna do like the sad opera.
Right. There's also one other question from Butterknife. So it's entirely possible that all megaflora is hybridizing relatively quickly, but we all just die before it can become obvious to us.
Yes. So as I said, quickly is relative, and so when it comes, so when
to our own perspective and everything else is.
Yep. So if we come from evolutionarily speaking, right? Humans are very new on the block. We've only been around maybe 100,000 years or so, versus trees have been around for millions, right? And so everything's on a different scale. Because, there are many tree species that don't become sexually mature until, even within a human lifetime. Like, it takes 2 human lifetimes before they get to, like, breeding age. And the thing is most of the time, most trees don't make it there. They're, the fecundity is really high. So when I talk about, I think I've talked about this on the stream before, but I will mention it to everyone. When it comes to species survival, there are the different strategies that you can have. Is you can either have few babies, and you put a lot of investment into those babies and raising them and taking care of them and making sure that they become adults and are happy and healthy. And that is called low fecundity, right? Humans have low fecundity, right? We have only a few babies, we take very good care of them, or we hope to, and then we try to get them to the next stage of their lives so then they can be an adults. And so a lot of mammals do this. So like, you have like elephants and even like a dog or a cat who can have a pretty good like big litter, that's still considered kind of a low fecundity organism, right? Versus a fish has thousands of babies, right? And then it's just like, good luck. Be strong, because it's a numbers game, and most plants are that way. Okay, most plants have very high fecundity, which is we have lots and lots and lots and lots of seeds, and it's a numbers game. So the majority of like maple seeds, oak seeds, whatever, is it takes them a really long time to get to sexual maturity, but once they do, they can have like 30,000 seeds in a season. Right? And then they have that like every year until they die. And even though it's like a hundredth or thousandths of a percent of them will actually make it, it doesn't matter because you just got so many. Right?
Like you mentioned, they're playing to the numbers. Something's gonna take.
Right. And the thing is, one of the reasons that, for example, outside my house, we have a lot of bur oaks. And this year was what's called a mast year. And so that means is that last year, they didn't produce any acorns at all. But this year, they produced a whole shload of them. The reason for that is most of those are going to get eaten by predators, right? Like squirrels and mice and other small things. But because they produce so many, some of them will make it, right? And that is an evolutionary adaptation to predation, because what had happened is you make all these seeds every year, right? Well, then you started to get these animals evolve to eating all these seeds every year, right? And then none of the seeds make it because they're all getting eaten. So the other strategy is you have what's called a mast year, which is you skip a couple years where you don't have seeds at all and you starve the predators out, and then you have a whole bunch again.
That is so interesting. There's a sense of intelligence behind some of these things that it just evolutionary speaking, it just how do you expect these things to happen, right?
Right. And so the thing is, what I should say is there's no agency in this, right?
Right. No, obviously, but it's still, you still have to ask the question, how did it get to this point where it's doing that? Because that is in some form an intelligent way of handling this problem.
Right. And so how you can think about it, it's kind of the same way that antibiotic resistance occurs, right, in medicine. It doesn't have to do with, it's that if you put a selective pressure on something, whatever that selective pressure is, be it a medicine, be it predators, you know what I noticed? All these trees are getting more expensive. The economy, guys.
Well, you can also upgrade the trees too.
Ooh, can I?
Yeah, look, like right underneath it says those stars. If you put more money into them, I think they'll yield more or potentially more money.
Where is this? Now I'm confused. No.
So go back to the top right.
Top right, yes. Oh.
No, yeah, go back to where the plants, and then you'll see the stars.
You are correct. Huh. I'm learning things.
Upgrade this herb, yep, and it can grow faster.
I'm upgrading the herb.
There we go.
I've upgraded the herb. But yeah, so basically what happens is that you've putting down this selective pressure. And it's more of the oh well, why are things the way this, why are all the plants this way now? And it's like, because all the ones that weren't didn't make it. that's the real crux of it, right?
Develop a process over a period of time, trial and error again and again and again until eventually found this way of doing it.
Right, where it's something happened, right, and there's a selective pressure, and then the ones so when we say survival of the fittest is a very general term on what is going to help me survive right now, right, under this current condition. And as soon as conditions change, that might not be the best strategy anymore, right?
Right. You always have to add context to these things.
Yes. And there's also the possibility where you have holdovers. So when we were talking about the red pigments like anthocyanin that are produced, so the red pigments in trees, if we're coming back to fall, the ones that do make red pigments, they that happens during this chlorophyll process, right? And it has to do with the colder the air is, the more oxygen there is in it. It's the same thing for water, right? There's more oxygen present. And this occurs, what will happen is that oxygen reacts with some of those different pigments and sugars that are still in the leaf, and it creates the red pigment. So that's like a side effect, right? But it's also thought that there's some theories on maybe it helps against predation, and it has shown that aphids will avoid like red leaves, but it's not sure if they avoid red leaves or they're just more attracted to yellow ones because those taste better. Because anthocyanins are bitter, right? And don't taste good. And so any kind of fruit that's got like a dark reds or dark purple pigments or something like that, that is actually an anti-herbivory defense against getting nommed on by insects or animals. Because they don't taste good, because they're bitter tasting. But some people think that they're just an evolutionary holdover.
Okay.
That the anthocyanins are made by certain plants because maybe in the past there was some sort of fauna that really, really liked to eat on them, and the red pigment made them taste bad or was toxic to whatever fauna this is, right? And it's just a holdover. And so it's not that the plant's really getting any use for it anymore, but there's no reason for it to get rid of it, so it just keeps it.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Things are successful. Why should I change anything?
Right. Even if it's not, and also plants have a tendency too of, if it's not broke, don't fix it kind of thing.
Exactly.
And
yeah,
so,
that's what I was thinking.
And so, because also plant genomes are very, very large. They have a lot of genes. And so most genes, even if it originally evolved to do one thing, will eventually get maybe repurposed into doing something else over evolutionary time.
Now, I did want to bring up a couple of comments that I thought you would find entertaining. Who mentions, oh my god, this explains why over the last few years we've had so many acorns at Mom's. Yep, it sounds like that's exactly it.
It's a mast year. And then you'll have a few years where there aren't any.
Butterknife mentions, says that nature favors a hoe. High fecundity. So that totally makes
it's
totally
true.
Makes sense.
It's true. High fecundity.
And Butterknife did also say one other thing. How do we know that for sure plants don't have agency? But I think we kind of went over that just a moment ago with this particular conversation about how those things work.
And there is some thought that there is at least a little bit. And actually, the thing is it's really hard for us to say, just because so it has to do with, it is humans studying something that isn't human. How do you think like something that's not human?
How do we interface with those things? How do we understand? Yeah. Because
all I can say is that if they do have agency, and it's like they have changed this to like plant signaling, or what's called plant communication. They used to call it plant neurobiology or plant behavior, and the animal people didn't like that because they're like, they have no brain, And it's like, no, they don't have a brain like us, okay? And they don't have a central nervous system. Everything is a lot more localized within a plant. So, like, even the... Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, just make a comment, but they still react to stimuli regardless.
Yes. Yes. So they react to stimuli. There is some evidence for, if you look up Venus flytraps or other carnivorous plants, for a type of short-term memory to stimuli. And it all has to do with calcium signaling, which is actually the exact same way that our nerves work, too. But it's over shorter distances because they don't have a nervous system like we do. Because also, like, the plant immune system is very different than ours in the sense that, if I could... so, for example, if we have something, like a cell in us that's sick, right? the cell will put proteins on the outside that say, I am sick, right? And white blood cell will come over and examine it and will usually eat it or break it down. And then we'll take those proteins or foreign things it finds and take it to the lymph nodes and be like, hey, yo, I found this weird thing. Right? Is this bad? Right? And then there are what are called memory B cells, which are in the lymph nodes that keep track of the different antibodies that you've made over your life. And they compare and go, right? And they're like, no, I haven't seen this before. Okay, well, we'll put that in the file. All right. And then they'll start making antibodies and other T cells, which are called killer T cells, where it's like, hey, go look for this, dude, this weird thing. And then they go and they go look for it, right? And then we'll go and get rid of anything that has that motif or whatever. But if they've seen it before, they're like, oh, man, totally have seen this before. This is bad, right? We need to get the troops mobilized. And then you have an immune response. Well, in plants, it's very localized. They don't have to, you don't go to lymph nodes. You don't have white blood cells or anything. What happens is this plant goes, this is bad. It's like the cell itself gets sick, but it doesn't have another cell tell it, you should kill yourself, right? Or have another cell eat it. It's just like, everything is bad and this is bad. So what it does is it tells all the cells around it, I'm sick and it's bad and everything is bad. I'm going to blow myself up.
Right.
And it blows itself up and it blows itself up and all its friends around it to stop the spread.
Ah, interesting.
And so when you see if you see a green tree and you see like a leaf, like one leaf that's turned yellow and like brown or whatever, that leaf was sick and it blew itself up.
Gotcha. Just to prevent anything else from going through.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
And what happens is, so there's two stages in plant immune response. There is what's called pattern-triggered immunity, which if there are any Star Trek nerds here, I basically call yellow alert.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like there's a stimulus, right? It could be bad, it could be good. I don't know what it is, right? And they get ready. And then as soon as they detect a foreign virus, a foreign protein, a foreign whatever, then they go into full red alert. Holy crap, everything is bad, alarm mode, right? But the thing is that plants communicate with each other through chemical compounds, hormone compounds and things, and volatile compounds, things you can smell through the air as well as the soil and the root systems, to tell other plants around them that something bad's going on. And so what will happen, and so that's what you smell when you cut grass, is the plant's wounding compound, right? Is like, something is chewing on me. Just because it's a lawnmower, the plant still responds the same way as if it were a cow. And so any of the nearby plants are like, oh no, we better get ready. And so what will happen is that if there is a sick tree, all the trees around it will have gone through yellow alert before they ever get exposed. So they're ready to go right away.
Real quick, Ooze says he's got to go. So I just want to mention this so we can say bye. Bye, Ooze. We'll see you later.
See you later.
But he did say one more thing. This tiny thing is sus. What? No, I wasn't in lymph nodes.
How dare you? This is sus. I don't like it. But
yep.
Yeah, and so because of that, so I still call it the plant immune response, even though it's technically they don't have antibodies or an immune system, so they call them defense responses. But I think that's just because animal researchers get all about plant people using their terms. Because reasons. I don't know why.
I mean, I feel like language is interchangeable. One other thing, Butter Knife mentioned, but like plant communication networks facilitated with fungal pathways is a freaking cool concept.
Oh yeah.
What is that? That's not a thing I've heard about.
Oh, so when I was telling you about getting nitrogen, right?
Yeah. Oh,
So-
right.
So the thing is that plants get that either by forming symbiotic relationships with either fungus or bacteria, right? But there are fungal networks, underground fungal networks called mycorrhizal, right? So myco is fungus, rhizo is root. Of these, basically it's like a web, right? Like these sort of filaments that wrap around the roots and connect all these different trees to each other. So you can have some plants which have roots that are intertwined, and so you can get a signal from this plant to this plant, right? But the actual, like, basically it's the internet, but underground, right?
Sure.
So you can have one tree that's cut down at this end of the forest, and within, I think they figured out it's like a matter of like an hour or sometimes minutes depending, a tree on the other end of the forest will know it happened, basically. Like, we'll start making defensive compounds.
Oh, wow.
And it's through this fungal network.
Holy crap.
And that's also how, like, different, so earlier when I was talking about some of the plant communication signaling, stuff like that, an excellent book, and I recommend this to anyone who wants to learn more about plants but doesn't know anything, is called What a Plant Knows by Dr. Daniel Kamovitz. And it talks about how plants see, how plants breathe, how they communicate, how they smell, different ways they respond to things, and some of these very sort of basic processes and the immune system, as well as behavior. And then another great one, if we want to talk about how communities of trees and forests interact with each other, is by I can't remember his first one. His name. It's his last name is Wohleben, a German guy, forester, and it's called The Hidden Life of Trees.
Ah, okay.
And he's an excellent writer. He's just a guy, not a PhD person, right? He's worked in the Forestry Service for years, you know, is a naturalist, and a dorky kind of person like me that just loves plants. And it is an excellent book. And so those are some of the top ones that I recommend people, especially for people who you don't want, it's like, they don't dumb it down or anything, but they do a really good job of writing for someone who doesn't have a very technical background, right?
Sure.
In that sort of thing.
Huh? Someone like me.
You'd really love it. I can let you borrow these books when I hear, although I think my dad still has my copy of The Hidden Life of Trees.
Gotcha. I will say that Ethan tossed the links for those books on the chat.
Thank you.
Yes, it's very good, very good. And a couple comments that came up. Another thing that Butterknife mentioned, and other trees will keep stumps' root networks alive through the fungal network, and that's fascinating.
Yep.
And Pasta also mentioned when leaves biodegrade, what are they contributing to the soil?
So you get carbon. You also will get some of those other nitrogen compounds. There's not many sugars that are left. It's mostly because those have been pulled in by the tree, but it's mostly minerals. So as I said, carbon, some nitrogen, some phosphorus, some sulfur as other minerals. So it's just a natural sort of fertilizer. So the best thing you can do actually is if you've got a bunch of leaves, don't rake them all up and throw them away. What you should do is, the best thing you can do is run your mower over them and mulch them up and leave them there to fertilize your yard and your trees. Because then your trees can also reabsorb that, those nutrients too.
Plants, I'll tell you. they are a lot more complex than I had realized.
Well, what had you thought before? Just out of curiosity, Hen.
I mean, I didn't. To be frank, I don't know if I had very many thoughts about plants in general. It's one of those things where you see, you're like, oh, they're pretty, and you kind of move on with your day, not really understanding the processes that work behind the scenes and everything else that comes with it.
Yeah.
I will say, real quick, game wise, maybe you should upgrade the little ghosts, and they'll pick up more plants for you quicker.
This is probably a good idea.
There they are.
I don't know if this upgrades the ghosts or the actual animals, but maybe it will. Oh, maybe they are moving quicker. But, so there's actually a term for that. On not noticing plants.
Well, what's the term?
It's called plant blindness.
Yes. Well, I mean, I've been plant blind for a while then.
Most people are, because it's they might as well be furniture.
Yeah, in some ways, yeah. I guess you could just, if you're going on like for me, for example, if I'm going on a hike, I'm seeing these plants all around the place, and I'm like, oh, that's nice, that's pretty, that's it. Moving on.
Yeah, because they are so ubiquitous to our part of life. I've talked to so many people, they don't even realize that they're alive most of the time. Or it's like, when I say, it's like, oh yeah, well, it's because, it's like, well, why does this, like, fog up or what happened? Or why is it so humid, you know, outside? And I'm like, well, that's just because they're breathing, right? And they're like, plants breathe? I'm like, yes.
Yo!
Yo.
Butterknife also said to tell me about how many genes a lot of plants have and how way more than people and animals.
Oh, like, so here's an example. So I think I've said this before on some of my streams, but I know you haven't been at all of them. But so when it comes to humans, like have we talked about the concept of a model organism?
I don't think so.
So a model organism is something we use in science to study bigger processes, but as a way to try to learn more about, like, so humans or testing or drugs or whatever, you know. And mice are a common model organism in science to study disease. In humans, because they're also mammals. Now, mice aren't always the perfect, you know, model. Sometimes there are other models which are better.
Sure.
But that depends on what you're trying to study, but that's neither here nor there. But so a model organism in plants is something called Arabidopsis, which is also called mouse-eared cress. It's a little weed about this big. Okay. And its entire life cycle happens in 4 months. Okay. So
4 months.
4 months. So a good model organism is a few things. It is small. It is got a relatively simple genome. I say that way on purpose, and I'll explain why in a second. It has lots of babies.
Sure.
And has a short life cycle, right? So that you can do lots of tests very quickly. And so that's one of the reasons everybody likes mice, everybody likes fruit flies. The first model organisms were like yeast and bacteria, you know, for all of those reasons. So Arabidopsis, the little weed, has 10 chromosomes. So it is diploid, which means it's got one set of chromosomes from mom, one set of chromosomes from dad. 10 total. And it has 36,000 genes.
Woo!
Humans have 25,000.
Oh, okay. Wow.
weed. Now,
Interesting.
the organism with the biggest genome on the planet is a flower.
Really?
Yep. In Japan. You can look it up if you'd like. Before that, it was a fern, but the flower is one that's been recently discovered.
What do you know? Do you remember the name of that flower off the top of your head?
Gosh, it is a type of like lily. Well, it's not like it's lily looking. It's got a big white flower. Ethan, help me. Huh?
What are we looking for?
The largest genome. The largest plant genome. It was recently discovered, I think, at the end of 2018. I read a paper about it. It's from Japan. It's a type of, it's this pretty flower. Got it?
Paris japonica.
Which one?
Paris japonica.
Paris japonica. There we go. And the size of the genome is
150 billion. Oh my god.
which in comparison to humans
links are in the chat. Pasta made a comment. He says, "I only have one pair of jeans."
Indeed.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think we've discussed some of this on the stream.
3 billion base pairs for humans.
How many, hon?
3 billion.
3 billion for humans. So.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I wonder to myself, why does it require so many genes?
Well, think about it. What is some possible reasons why plants, and as I said, like plants in general, have many more genes than mammals? Mammals actually, so when it comes to mammals, and so this is always really funny because when we were first studying genetics, because humans tend to be very self-centered and self-righteous, there was well, we obviously are the most complicated organism and must have the biggest genome, right?
Right.
Okay, even for mammals, we're like middle of the road.
Yeah, we're like, look at our big brains! These things are super complicated!
Mm-hmm.
It has to have 25 billion, whatever.
Whatever. Yep. Guess what? Bigger isn't always better, but
Right.
it has to do with and the size of a genome doesn't also necessarily mean the size of genes, right? And most genes pour like double duty, so it's pretty complicated. But we're very middle of the road. But what I'm sort of getting at is, if you have to spend your entire life in one place, you have to be able to have all of the tools you need to survive in that place.
Sure. Situations that arise, things that have happened before in the past that your plant ancestors have kind of compensated for, made things for.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense.
So because of that, they have to be a lot more adaptable than we do, because we can just get up and leave where we're like, this place sucks.
Okay.
Right?
That does make sense, yeah.
It's like this place sucks and there's no food. It's like, well, I'll just have to go find food somewhere else. And it's like, that's one of the reasons that plants are autotrophs. They make their own food. Unless you're a carnivorous plant, and that's a whole nother thing. But
right.
they also make their own food, but they get other nutrients in different ways. But they had to adapt, right, to deal with those environments. And so the thing is that their genomes have to have all of the different tools, because, like, for example, like, we don't make most of the vitamins that we need, we can't make. Most of the amino acids we need, we can't make. We have to eat those, right? Versus plants make all their own, right? Make all their own hormone, make all their own vitamins, make all their own proteins, and we have to eat plants to get those things. The only thing that they can't do is fix nitrogen from it. One of the few things that, I won't say the only thing, but one of the few things they can't do is to fix nitrogen from the air, and that's why they make symbiotic relationships with bacteria and fungus to do that.
Right, they can't do everything.
Yes.
There are a couple of comments from Butterknife that I do want to bring up. How do these plant cells maintain a nucleus that big? Are their overall cells bigger?
Yes.
And are there any examples of mobile plants?
So
and let me know if you need me to repeat any of those.
It depends. So if we start with this plant cell size, right? So plant cells are very big, number one, in comparison to animal cells in general. And when it comes to movement, it depends on what your definition of movement is. So an animal cell itself. So does everyone know what like a meter is? A meter is like 3 feet, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Then you have a centimeter. Then you have a millimeter. So the next size is a micrometer or micron, right? Which is 100, microns in 1 millimeter. So very, very small, right? One animal cell can crawl 1 micron in about a minute, right? Just right? A plant cell, the average plant cell is 100 microns across, okay? And they have what's called cytoplasmic streaming, which is that everything within there is moving very quickly. There are big, long protein highways that shuttle nutrients and signals and information back and forth. A molecule can go from one end of that 100 micron cell to the other end in 1 second.
Oh, wow.
That's how fast plant cells are moving. But it's on the inside, right? So information, so you can watch information be moved through, usually it's through calcium or other small molecules, where if you have a calcium marker on like a leaf and you touch a leaf, you will see the calcium concentrate here and then explode across the plant in a matter of seconds.
Wow, I had no idea it was that quick for them.
Yes. So they do move, although because they have to do it in a coordinated way on a cell by cell basis. So usually it has to do with a bending, right, and a growing, right? So it's like this cell starts to move, this cell starts to move, this cell starts to move. So that's one of the reasons that it's gradual. That's why if you watch a sunflower, right? Like a sunflower turns its face towards the sun, and then throughout the day, follows it.
Right.
And so if you speed it up, it's just we don't notice it because it's very slow, right, on our standard. But anything that moves quickly, like an animal, you have to expend a lot of energy. It's one of the reasons that we're hot-blooded, right? Is because we have to expend a lot of energy and eat a lot, right, to maintain that much movement and to move that quickly. Also one of the reasons that we need to sleep, right? Plants don't sleep. Instead, they do different processes. So they're constantly working. It's just what they're working on is different. So during the day, they do photosynthesis. At night, they do respiration, which is our version of like basically eating, right?
Let me see. By the way, Pasta made a comment. He said, "All hail the Paris." How do you pronounce it? Japonica?
Paris Japonica, yeah.
All hail the Paris Japonica, our genetically superior rulers.
I appreciate you. If we want to talk about mobile plants, a good example of ones that would move quickly are bladderworts, are Venus flytraps, our sundews, different types of carnivorous plants which trap prey, especially ones that have active traps. So the most common type of carnivorous plant is a pitcher plant that's a passive trap. Okay.
Right.
And that design for carnivorous plants is the most common because it takes the least amount of energy, right? But you do have ones which are active traps. And so now there are other types of, so as I said, depending on what you consider mobility, there are what are called walking trees or a banyan tree. And so a banyan tree spreads by putting out a branch. So most trees, if they're clonal, like for example, if you've got like a quaking aspen, if you've got a banana, if you've got other types of trees that come out in clumps, is they spread via the roots, right? Where it's like they'll have a root and then up comes a new shoot, right? Or a new trunk. It looks like a new tree, but it's really the same one, right? And they have multiple shoots. So like the largest tree on Earth is a quaking aspen grove named Pando in Utah. That's many, 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 many acres. Like hundreds of acres in size.
Oh, wow.
Like it is the heaviest organism on Earth, if we put it all together. But it goes via the roots, right? Well, a walking tree or a banyan tree is it puts out a branch, and then the roots come from the branch down to make a new trunk. And so it looks like it's walking on stilts.
Oh, wow.
And then spreads out across the area. So, and if things are good, the old trunk will stay there and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, right? And basically forms like this gigantic mass. Or there are some examples where the old tree or the old trunks will die, right? And there are other species that do this, other types of walking trees. And so they technically move, right? So you can watch this tree move.
You just have to sit there and let it do its thing for a while before you can actually see the results.
Yes, right. So it's you come back next year, right, and see, oh, you moved this far.
Neat.
It's like you made your way all the way over here. Well, and bananas do that too, because when a banana makes a new shoot, it will have a hand of bananas, and after it's had one hand of bananas, then that one will never fruit anymore, and sometimes that one dies, right? So over time, this plant starts moving, right? It's still the same plant, but
that's intense. Real quick, just a couple of comments. I think you mostly covered this. So Butter Knife made a mention, but there are no plants that pick up and move location. I think we covered that. That there are some plants, but they just move very, very slowly.
Mm-hmm.
And another comment says, yeah. And Butter Knife also says, yeah, the one that covers that one covers a few mountains. And Geekon says, hi there, Drunk Phytologist, long time no see.
Hi, how
Kiko?
are you? Gecko? I haven't seen him forever. Now everyone wants a fascinating naturalist and herbalist to talk to. They're here now.
Hey.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see. Butterknife also mentioned: are those walking trees creating actual roots at the end of their walking branches, or are they making like specialized leaves?
So what will happen is the branch will come out and there'll be leaves on the top, but then it looks like almost like a rope, like this little tendril will go down, and then the tendril will root down in there, and then over time it gets bigger and expands into a full trunk.
Ah, gotcha.
They're very, very cool. If you ever want to see any, if you're down in Florida sometime, in the not scary COVID times, go to the Fort and Edison Summer Estates. There are some huge ones there because Thomas Edison, when he was working on the light bulb, and his invention for the light bulb was trying every different kind of ingredient he could think of to make a filament. And that included different things from different tree species. But he was also kind of a plant nerd and collector. And so he had a whole bunch of plants from all over the globe. And it's very, very gorgeous. And so there's these banyan trees that he's got there that are just freaking huge. Like they will take the tendrils, right, and put them other places, or will have to cut them back because the tree was trying to walk into the building.
Oh, no.
Like, they've actually adjusted the parking lot, like, around this tree. Because the tree's like, I'm going over here now. Later. Because they've been there for so long, it's just like... Because there's some pictures when it was first planted, it's like, oh, it's in, like, this little cluster, and there's all these other trees, and now it's just the banyan tree. Right.
That's intense. Geeko does mention, life, huh?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
No. Geeko was one of the first people who ever talked to me during, in the Shadow Council Discord, and we nerded out for a long time about plants in the natural world, so it's very nice that you're here again. I've not got to chat in a long time.
Oh, that's dope.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Do I have any other questions about plants and otherwise? I mean, we covered a lot of the autumn stuff that we mentioned earlier in the stream.
And that was funny because we kind of got a little... we got into the weeds again, but that's fine.
As it so happens. I mean, that's just what we do.
As it happens, that's true.
Yes. Well, let me ask you a question about this game. Are any of these plants actually real?
They favor some types, but they're a little bit too stylized for me to be able to tell, for sure what they are. I mean, they're certainly pretty. As I said, you have, like, sort of the red color, and when Ooze was here earlier, we talked about, like, how these do have chlorophyll, you just can't see it because the red is just so bright.
Right.
But, like, these purple flowers, like these dark flowers, have a lot of those anthocyanins that we talked about, which are protective compounds against herbivory, which they also help. So, for example, like our yellow ones here would be more protected from the sun. But yeah, anthocyanins form with the breakdown of oxygen reacting with the different sugars and what are called flavonoids. And flavonoids are your vitamin B.
Ah, okay.
And so after those react and things, you get the anthocyanins are a product of those. So those are your different vitamin B ones, and stuff like that. And so the red compound doesn't actually form until fall. And as I said, there's not very many plants that actually make the red compound like in fall. Now there are plants which are red all the time, and that has to do with give defensive advantages.
Right. That you mentioned earlier regarding particular animals going after those plants. Yeah. Which is still kind of blowing my mind. But, I mean, like you mentioned before, it's just a process of how naturally those things just form, those things.
Yep. No.
Those were words.
Those were words. It is a fun, it is a fascinating design. It is fascinating to study, for sure. And how these different adaptations arise. And
And Pasta does mention, or asking, are trees more likely to die during winter? And also, what contributes to a dead tree, or dead in a tree?
So there can... So, depending on what happens, so the younger a tree is, the more likely that winter is going to be hard on it. Just because it doesn't have that mass of storage capacity, right? It's basically like if a bear did not eat enough before it went to sleep for the winter, right? Things that can kill a tree is if it does get really cold really fast. It could kill off the roots if it's not prepared, so you can get some freezing out. That's one of the reasons that depending on where you live, you don't want to be planting trees in the fall, because you could potentially burn and freeze the roots, because the ground itself, like under the snow, is going to be warmer than the outside air, right? But if the roots don't have a good way of establishing and preparing ahead of time, and they can get froze if you're not careful.
And it's funny you mentioned that, because Geeko mentioned often, depending on the interactions of environment and species, our oak trees will uproot in winter weather from hard rain or snow load.
Yeah. And so that is the trying to sort of protect those sorts of things, right, and keep things from freezing out too badly. And so younger trees are the ones that are going to be the most under the most risk, for sure. I do not know off the top of my head if there's statistically more, death that occurs from, winter or winter weather, which is very dependent on temperature as well as moisture, and soil nutrient availability, than there is at any other times of the year. The majority, so most plants, so if we come with trees, most of them die before they actually ever germinate because they're eaten by things. Okay. So before they're ever born, really, is most of the time because the seeds are eaten by predators, or they rot, or they don't end up in the right, they don't establish well because they're in a spot where they rooted and they don't get enough light, or they don't have enough nutrients or enough space or whatever. Those are the majority of the reasons. So very, very, very high, if you want to say it, infant mortality, right? Like that's the highest. And then after that, it's in the first few years, and don't quote me on this, my gut feeling says that most tree death or dead in trees is a result of disease. Just as a pathologist, that's my gut feeling.
Right. And a couple comments from Gecko. All plants have survival ranges. Any plant that's closer towards extremes of its range will be more at risk from weather events. And it's often based on individual trees and how well or ill suited they are for the lot that they're drawn in life. Oh, and one more comment from Gecko. On the West Coast right now, in vast majority of mature trees, death is heat and drought related. Yep. Right, that makes sense.
Yep. So I'm just sort of, and I completely agree, and I'm glad Gecko's here too to talk about this, because he's in an area that I'm less familiar with and I'm not in. In our area, it's disease more often than not. And I don't know globally overall, right? As I said, like my gut feeling is it's most likely disease if we take off all the trees on the planet, right? But depending on the area, depending on the situation, depending on the weather, climate change, soil content, it could be that it's like the majority of tree death happens for this reason over another one. For example, when I was talking about, the changing of fall colors, and I was listening to the Field Guides podcast, and they are up in Buffalo, New York, right? And they were like, oh, well, if only 13% of all trees change their colors, that doesn't seem like a lot, and it feels like it should be more. Well, the reason it felt like it should be more is in their area, of the species in their area, 70% changed color. So you see, it's relative, right? So even though it's 13% globally, right, in their area, right, the species which are there and are well adapted, 70% of them do, right?
It's that bias again coming up.
Right. So you've got to be very careful on so that's when I say, like, I'm answering the question, right? As most answers in biology, where it's like, oh, well, why is it? It's like, is it this way or this way? It depends. Is the most common answer, right?
It's context, like perspective, and where these things are happening.
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah, because because local adaptation has a lot to do with it, right?
Gecko said one more thing. We have beetles and fire, but both are symptoms of climate.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Beetles as in, like, beetles can do harm and damage to trees?
Oh yes. It depends on the beetle, but there are several species of beetles that are completely wiping out certain populations of trees.
Holy crap. I had no idea.
Yeah, so, like, for example, let's see. Now, the woolly adelgid is not a type of beetle. The woolly adelgid is a type of bug that's wiping out basically all hemlocks, the emerald ash borer, which is wiping out ashes. There are pine, like, spruce beetles, which, like, they're almost like from stories like locusts, right? Like, once you get, like, a huge, concentration of them, a really population boom, they just kill things. Just, like, you have, like, the reason that the American chestnut is functionally extinct is because of a fungal pathogen that wiped them all out. Where, I mean, there was, like, if there were certain areas of the northeast of the U.S. where you would just drive and you just see just up the hill, right, and on either side, just as far as you can see, dead trees.
Woof.
Yeah, he's bad. He's real bad. That's what happened when Dutch elm's disease happened, which was also a fungal pathogen. That wiped, because elm trees were planted in cities quite often because they were pretty and they grew quickly, and were easy to take care of and stuff. And then when Dutch elm disease show up, one of the reasons that it spread so quickly is because there were so many so this is the problems with what we call monoculture, which is if you have the same kind of plant.
Right. It's much easier to wipe out the whole lot of them because they all have this. They're basically the same, right?
Right. And that also happens in horticulture a lot too, where you will have basically what happens is that if you have the same kind of, is a lot of the time different trees or other horticulture plants are all made by cuttings. So not only are they the same species, they may be the exact same plant.
Right.
They're clonal, right? And so that's the reason, like, bananas are getting wiped out right now, because all the bananas that you get in the store are all from the exact same parent. They're all genetically identical.
That's a big problem.
Yeah, it's a big problem.
On a lighter subject, I need you to tip your hat for Cha. She says that the hat game is on point as always.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you. But yeah, so, like, right now, so you get more pest load depending on the climate. So when we talk about pest load as a population of the pest, is the warmer temperatures, right, will make sure that instead, so for example, certain pests haven't been a problem before because the winter it would get cold and they die off, right? But if it doesn't get cold enough and they don't die off, then you have this excess pest pressure all the time. right? And so that can lead to problems. Many problems.
Yeah.
But the thing that what's funny to me is like we haven't really learned our lessons about monoculture, because when Dutch elm's disease showed up, all of the elm trees died, and then it's like, oh no, everything looks terrible and all these trees died, and it's just like, and one of the reasons the disease spread so quickly is because the only trees that were planted in some of the only trees that were planted in urban areas were elms, right? So they just went bounce, 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 one to the other, right? So instead, oh well, we'll just replace them all with ashes.
Does that help?
Well, they replaced them all with ashes, and then emerald ash borer showed up, and now all the ash trees are dying. And I'm like, why are you so dumb? Why?
Oh.
And I'm like, the only way to get around, to keep the spread of disease is, well, and you and I had this conversation earlier, is diversifying. Right?
Yep.
And so then now that a bunch of the ash trees are dying, they're like, oh, we'll replace them with maples. And I'm like, you dumb. I will. I'm like, vary them up just even a little bit, you know? Just a little bit. Just vary them just a little, you know? Have we learned nothing?
Apparently not.
No.
It feels like.
One of human superpowers is their ability to forget.
Yes, and I know this very well. I got fish brain. Very easy to forget. Oh, quick thing, by the way. We're at about an hour and 44 minutes. We're about to hit 45 in a bit. Just a heads up.
Yep. Nope. We usually, depending on how good the questions are, I'll go somewhere between like an hour and a half to like 2. But we've had lots of good questions today. This is exciting.
Yeah.
I'm pleased.
And it helps that I have very little knowledge, so this is about these things, and I am quite curious about how these plant systems work, because they are fascinating.
Yeah, everyone looks at me like I'm weird. Like, why do you study these things? I'm like, because they're cool as heck. That's why.
They're cool.
They're cool.
Leave me alone.
Yeah, leave me alone. You know? That's like...
Oh, boy.
Oh. Do I have enough of the money? Do I have enough of the money to expand some more? I should probably change my potions.
Yeah, I think changing potions would be a good idea. You're sitting at about a cool 100k at the moment.
Right.
You can afford. You can change some stuff up.
How we do that for now? See how that works. I'll prioritize that one. Stop taking my fruits.
They are not.
I know. Well, actually, what I need to do is see if I can get, because I need to get this one. I need to get this one.
What's that do?
So that increases my inventory. Because what's happening is if you get more than 20 of something, right, it'll give you money for harvesting, but then you can't keep that ingredient, right? And that will increase my capacity to 30. Which is
I was also thinking that you could probably get more of those little ghost things to help you out.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea too. All right, time to get another animal and kill them dead
and sacrifice it.
And sacrifice them for the good of the garden.
Yes. Enjoy this nourishment.
Enjoy this nourishment. I'm sorry, Bunny. But then after you die, then we can be friends forever, because you'll be a ghost.
It's not grim at all.
Nope. Hey.
Oh, and it seems the more you level it up, it grows faster too. I mean, we did most of the autumn questions that I had in the forefront of my head. I mean, and just to summarize, it sounds like that the plants they're pulling the chloroform from the leaves.
Chlorophyll, not chloroform.
No, it's a completely separate thing.
It's a really different thing.
Completely different thing. So it's taking the chlorophyll and kind of keeping that inside and kind of filling it with as much water as it can to survive the winter, as much energy as possible.
As well as sugars as a natural antifreeze.
Right. and then dropping the leaves because obviously it's not going to need it anymore. And that's kind of how the changes in colors happens.
Yes.
Doesn't happen. Doesn't need it anymore.
Yeah, but what and because there's a sort of a point of diminishing returns, basically,
right.
Where you having the leaves out costs more than it's worth than you would get from photosynthesis because of the shorter days.
Mm-hmm.
And also there's more potential for frost damage because of it getting cold. But what induces them to change, we don't really know.
Well, I was gonna bring that up too. Yeah, we have no clue.
We have some ideas, but no one's really sure. We think it's most likely tied to photoperiod. Some people say it's temperature too. Some other people say temperature only determines the intensity of color and has nothing to do with when it changes. Why it decides to change at a certain period of time and how that's decided, and what's the main switch, no one has any clue, right? But
and you know what?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So all we know is it's sort of a complicated process because a lot of different things happen when the plant's getting ready for dormancy, and in certain orders and stuff, and when that decision is made and how it is made, right, is not entirely clear.
And you know what I was wondering as well? How long does that process usually happen? I guess it really depends on the plant species.
Very.
But generally speaking, let's say like an oak, would you be aware how long the process takes between it moving from dropping all the leaves or changing the leaves, dropping them, and then going into hibernation mode?
It depends. the best answer. It depends.
Yeah. That feels like that comes up a lot. It's always to do with the context, the situation, and what it's dealing with.
Yes.
Sure.
So, for example, in our yard, up here in Minnesota, we have bur oaks, and they don't really change color. Like within, babe, how long did it take?
Depends on the tree, but it's like 3 or 4 days.
It was like 3 or 4 days.
Is that quick? That sounds.
They were like a light golden color, and then they were brown, and then they were done.
That's quick, right?
Yep. And some others it takes weeks.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was anticipating like between a month, 6 weeks maybe.
Yeah, but it has to do with bur oaks themselves don't actually keep a lot of. So, for example, sugar maples have a lot of sugar in their leaves, and so they take longer to pull all that sugars out, versus bur oaks don't really have any sugar. They don't keep sugar in their leaves much. It's just chlorophyll and, like some other, but not like sucrose, like some other like minor sugars and stuff like that. So they just pull that chlorophyll in real fast, and they're very efficient. They're like, all right, we're done. Drop the leaves, I'm done.
Let's go.
Yep. And so they don't even consider them having a color because it happens so fast, because it's like, okay, we're yellow, we're brown, we're done.
Oh, that's interesting.
See you later. And the more, I've noticed some of the more northern species, the earlier the days get shorter, the earlier that it gets cold, the faster they'll turn, right? Versus if it's a little bit more gradual, like down when I lived in Indiana, it'd be like a whole month of color, right? A whole month to 6 weeks of color. And it would be a bit more gradual too on these species, like for example, sumacs will turn very quickly. Like as soon as the days start getting shorter, they're like ready to go, right? And then everything else is like green. And so then by the time other ones are changing color, they've already lost their leaves. So as I said, it depends, right? It also has to do with soil nutrients. So I've noticed this in the trees by my work. I can tell which ones are doing better and which ones aren't by how quickly they turned, because there were all these little maple trees that were planted at the same time. But when the days started getting shorter, all but like one of them turned red right away, and the rest of them hadn't turned red yet at all. And I knew it was because that one was stressed.
Really? It's interesting how that works out.
Yep. Because it started the process, but it went through it much faster, right? And I'm gonna keep an eye on it because I'm afraid it's not doing that great. And then the rest of them eventually caught up, but I think it was under either where it's at, there's something up with the soil, because it also has to do with soil nutrients too, and nitrogen availability. Because as I said, each of these chlorophylls have 3 nitrogens. So if it really needed the nitrogen, it might also be breaking down some of that chlorophyll to get that nitrogen if there's not a lot of nitrogen in the soil. So that might be one of the ones that dies in the spring. I don't know. You know.
And I want to bring up a mention by Gecko, and also there's a question I'll also ask right afterwards. Gecko mentions, I like to think plants as collections of autonomous systems. There's no single decision-making system, just a group of interconnected feedback systems.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that is actually probably the best way to think of it.
Mm-hmm. And Butterknife has a question, are there any plant diseases or parasites that mess with trees' seasonal leaf changes?
Ooh.
That's a good question, I think.
There might be, but I'll be honest, I really don't know. Like that is not something I've had experience with.
Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering to myself, how would that, if a fungus or disease were to do that, how would it benefit from slowing it down, those kind of processes, or even stopping it completely?
So when the leaves fall off, it is a form of what we call senescence, which is where they start to turn yellow and the tissue starts to die. And that will happen in annual plants, or like in corn. Like if you see corn and it starts to turn like, the yellow color, and it's maturing and it's putting all its energy into making seeds and not growing anymore, then that is a form of senescence, which is basically controlled death, There are pathogens which will prevent plants from senescing. So when I told you like that leaf that got attacked and turned yellow and fell off because it wanted to prevent the spread of disease, there are pathogens which will prevent that from happening so that they can live on the plant longer, because they want to keep their host alive because they're a parasite. So Xanthomonas does this, for example. Agrobacterium, the pathogen I study, is what we call a biotrophic pathogen. Biotrophic means it wants to keep its host alive, versus a necrotrophic pathogen, like most fungal pathogens, now not all, but most, kill their host and then eat the body.
Woof.
That's why they're so nasty. So like, that's the reason, and they usually kill their host very quickly. Dutch elm's disease is like that. The blight that killed American chestnuts is like that. It was one of the reasons that plants have an easier time adapting to a pathogen that's a biotrophic pathogen, that's a parasite, because that happens over time. And there's sort of what we call an evolutionary arms race, right? Where one adapts a defense and then the parasite adapts a new attack strategy, and they go back and forth forever, right? But I mean, in a period, the reason the American chestnut was functionally extinct is it did not have enough time to try to adapt to this new pathogen, because that pathogen killed them all within a period of 10 years.
Woof. So yeah, that was not enough time for the trees to actually adapt or change anything about that, huh?
Well, because remember, if you reach sexual maturity when you're 50,
right, you're gonna end up killing off all the younger ones.
Yes. So what happens with the blight that kills the American chestnut is, as soon as they get a certain size, none of them ever reach sexual maturity because they die before then.
Jeez. Yeah, I could see that being a killer.
Yeah. Quite literally. So
yeah, literally.
That's one of the reasons that the late blight in potato, the reason that the Irish potato famine was so devastating. Because that's also a necrotrophic pathogen that just wiped out everything, and very quickly.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
So I will say that I do know that there are pathogens which delay senescence, and in fall, that is a type of like fall processes and this sort of, it is a type of senescence. So most likely, yes. But I can't think of one specifically. So sorry, Scary Butter Knife. But I'm sure you could probably look it up and find out, because I suspect there are. But unfortunately, that's not in my realm of expertise.
That's a good question, though.
Yes, I agree. But I am also very honest when I don't know, because there's lots of stuff I don't know.
Right, and with these kind of things, it's better to be fair and upfront about it rather than feign intelligence and say, yes, so it's this thing and that thing.
Nope. It's conjecture, but.
And we're sitting at about an hour and 59 minutes, but there is a couple of things.
Okay.
Gecko says, are there any trees that don't form annual rings?
It depends on your definition of a tree. Because palm trees don't.
Palm trees don't? I didn't know that.
Palm trees have no rings. Because a palm tree is a monocot, like corn is like grasses. They don't form rings. It's like a bunch of straws on the inside.
Ah, gotcha. Gecko says that palm trees are fake grass.
It's true. Palm trees are a grass that decided to get real big and become a tree. But bananas are the same way. There are, like, most hardwoods make rangs. So your dicots. So most trees are dicots, but not all of them. And you also have other monocot trees which also make rings. So the soft answer is yes. There are some that don't make rings, but depending on what you want to consider a tree.
Yeah, it's always in context. Like,
right.
It depends.
It depends. Well, and also the thing is that like a tree. So the term tree is very broad, right? It's basically a large woody plant, right? Large,
Large, yes.
And so, like, some things that we consider like shrubs or whatever are also tree-like under the right circumstances,
A shrubbery.
That's a shrubbery, right? And depending on where they live and stuff like that, they can manifest differently, right? And have different phenotypes. Phenotype is what something looks like, right? And phenotype is determined by, phenotype is determined by your genetics, but as well as all the other, a variety of other factors. Nutrient availability, weather, stresses, you name it. So.
One more comment by Gecko. It says trees are defined by diameters at breast height. So says the term dendrodrology textbook. Lol.
Oh, yep.
And single trunk woody pentrale. I can't pronounce words. These words are too scientific for me.
Yeah, dendrology, the study of trees. Which actually there is an excellent, I re-listened to that a little bit to prep for this stream, that there was Allie Ward, who does the science podcast Ologies, which I highly recommend. One, because she's hilarious, and two, she is a science communicator that works on television, but this podcast is her passion project. And basically, she interviews scientists because there's a science for basically everything, right? So that's why it's called ologies, right? So it's like cryptology, which is about bats, dendrology, whatever. And so she finds professionals for each one of these, talks to a bunch of nerds, but it's very casual, and it's all about like all these things you ever wanted to know about, blah, right? And I was just listening to a phenology episode, which is the study of the changing of the seasons.
Just to prep for this. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
with a dendrologist, which actually I'm going to look this up. So she studies, so she is a plant scientist, tree person. Da 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 da. Do do do. Looking.
Google.
Yep. With Dr. Libby Elwood. And so it's fall and fall seasons, and they talked all about this sorts of stuff. As well as, how climate change is affecting how seasons change and different things of that nature. So I'd say look that up. Although just ologies in general is an absolutely wonderful podcast for learning anything and everything about stuff. I mean, like this latest. So this month's, because she has a podcast that comes out every week, they're all about an hour to an hour and a half. And since this has been the spooky month, there was forest entomology, which is creepy crawlies, condorology, which is condors and vultures. Also, this week's was anthropodermic bidocodicology, which is about books that were made from human skin.
Oh no!
And human leather.
Oh no!
Oh yeah, it's a thing. She was interviewing historians who were studying those sorts of processes and why it was done and sort of the history behind that and the mysticism behind that, and stuff like that. So, yeah.
I'm just imagining a interview where someone just walking in and says, "Yeah, I'm being interviewed to be in a book. Isn't that wonderful?" And they're nodding, smiling.
Yikes. But then there's also things where it's just like toxicology, which is like which was about jellyfish venom, the oceans, cervidology, which is about deer and everything about deer. Let's see, medusology, which is jellyfish.
Medusology, really?
Yeah.
That's jellyfish?
That's jellyfish, right?
Huh.
Plumology, which is feathers. Philomatology, which is kissing.
Oh, you weren't kidding. That's a thing? Well, okay. I guess there has to be some science behind it, because what does that do to us? Yeah, okay.
There's a science behind everything, and there is usually a nerd studying it.
And they're all fascinated about it. Yeah, of course. Yep. There has to be.
There's got to be. So, I mean, some of my favorite ones, which is chronobiology, which is kind of related, which was about circadian rhythms. And how light determines that.
Right?
Huh?
That's sleep patterns, right?
Yep, sleep patterns, but also waking times, and how it's different in humans and animals and plants, because everything has somewhat of a circadian rhythm, right? And how do you deal with that? I will say one of my absolute favorites was a 2-parter episode with Dr. Merlin Tuttle, which was cryptology, which is all about bats, and how they're the best, and I love them. And also, Dr. Merlin Tuttle is one of the most adorable people on the planet. And he just had the best stories because he has been advocating. So back when he first studied bats, there was like a report where a kid got rabies from bats, and so then people went out and just started killing bats indiscriminately.
Yeah.
And the thing is it's like, bats usually don't carry rabies. Like a very, very small percentage of them do. And the likelihood of you getting bit by a bat if you don't work with a bat is so low. Like, you're more likely to get struck by lightning. Right? On a clear blue day.
Yeah, it's ridiculous how people respond to those kind of things. The same thing would happen when Steve Irwin died due to a manta ray. People started attacking him. Like that was going to do anything to help the situation. It was just an accident.
Right.
Move on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, because Dr. Tuttle has been working with them like his entire career, he goes, and because he studies the populations and studies different kinds and, does tagging and, looks at their dynamics and is a photographer, And so he takes all these beautiful pictures and videos and did education, and he had come up with the idea of bat houses, because for places for bats to hibernate, because we've destroyed a lot of the places that they would usually hibernate in, which is one of the reasons that their populations were hit so hard, because they had no place to go in the wintertime. And he had come up with, like, it's just some of these, he's like, okay, I've gotten bit by a lot of bats, right? Over the last 50 some odd years. Because I've grabbed a lot of bats and they don't like it. And they bite you. And I have not gotten rabies once. Or any disease from a bat. You know. And I work with them every day, so...
It's just bad luck. But Butter and I've mentioned stingray. Thank you for the correction. Stingray.
Yes, stingray. But it is fascinating. But I think the cutest story he said was how smart bats were, because he usually would train them. If he had one, it's like you usually keep them just for like a few days and like let them go and do photography, especially if they were a new species, or documentations just to see how they would do. And he'd give them like treats and stuff, right? And so, you know, if they fly, you give them a treat or whatever. Well, he had figured this one bat like came up to him and then like booped him on the nose. And then he was just like, that's weird, right? Like, why'd he do that? And then he figured out that the bat kept doing that because he wanted a treat. He's like, give up the goods, dummy. Right? And the thing is, it's like, and he goes, I was so flabbergasted, right, by the whole thing, because I'd never had one of them do that before, right? But he had figured out, it's like, oh, right, well, if I do this, you know, because apparently it's like, he flew around the room and it wasn't quick enough for this bat, and it's like, all right, give me the treat, buddy. And so then later, after he got done and he let the bat go, the bat kept hanging around. Like, they're outside and his student, like, let it go, and the student came back and then booped them on the nose. Like, all right.
Need that snack.
I know.
Ain't going nowhere.
Give me the snack. I know you got the goods. Hand it over.
Madame Terry says, kids are way grosser than bats. This checks out.
Also true.
Yeah. But yeah. That's something.
But yeah, so I highly recommend that one. That was one of their Halloween-y sort of ones from last year. It was very sweet and very cute, but almost like all of them are just so good. The Field Guides is also, give them some love. They're a littler podcast, but they've done 2 episodes on fall. Their second episode ever was on fall colors. That's where a lot of the information I was talking to you about on how chlorophyll works, the carotenoids, how the anthocyanins come in the leaves, right? How the plant prepares, we're not sure, you know, how most of this stuff works, you know, but we have these ideas, and they do a good job of comparing the different prevailing theories and the different studies that are out there in their second episode called Fall Colors. And then they also did one about autumn, but basically the study of autumn and the season changes, and that was last year in November, which they said it was autumn, straight to you, pumpkin spice flavored. Because both Steve and Bill are a couple of dorks.
Right. As it seems that most scientists are, they all have to be kind of dorky, right?
No, we're all a bunch of dorks. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. This is not surprising to me, and I find it very endearing.
Mm-hmm. No, and basically anybody who is sufficiently nerdy, even if you're not like a scientist, or if you're an amateur scientist or a professional one, like me, and it's like, and anybody can be a scientist. I'm not one of these people who's like, you have to have a PhD, you know, like none of that crap, you know. But you get someone on their thing that they really like, and yeah, It's always fun.
They're gonna geek out. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Passionate people are always a ton of fun to be around.
Yep. And so that's one of the reasons that I wanted to recommend these guys, both of these podcasts, because they're very good because all the people involved are those kinds of people, right? So you never knew you wanted to know about tortoises, right? But now you love them. Because you listen to this talk about this person that studies tortoises and just loves the heck out of them,
100%. It reminds me of what was it? Frank Z. Is it Frank Z?
Not sure.
He makes those
Z Frank. Yep.
Z Frank, yeah. Like you could tell he's very, very passionate about it, and he enjoys the pageantry of it. It's all very silly and a lot of fun. Those kind of things. Like he is super nerdy as well.
Yep.
And a couple of comments. Gecko. I was about to say geek. The geeks versus jocks are a thing of the past. We're all internet using fantasy sports, playing nerds now.
It's true.
And Madame Terry says, as God intended, probably.
Yes, indeed. I agree. I wholeheartedly agree. All right. Any other comments for the good of the folks?
Just a couple more from Gecko and Madame Terry. God probably had a great shrug emoji, and yeah, Madame Terry just agreeing 100% yes.
Indeed.
I think that's it.
All right. Do you have any other burning questions, darling?
No. At this moment I feel like I am caught up on, and I understand plants just a little bit more now, and I appreciate you for that.
Yeah. And thank you for joining me today after I bullied you into it's keeping me company. Yeah, I'm sorry everyone. I've been trying to bring along the last few times experts or people who know more than I do about the different subject matter, but there are not a lot of people who study fall processes, actually, that I'd mentioned before. The only person I found was that gal that was the phrenologist that Allie Ward interviewed, and I don't know her, and I was too much of a coward to message her.
You should, because you never know if they'll say yes, and who it'll harm. It won't do any harm.
Yeah, it's true. But I'm one of the Patreon supporters of the Field Guide, so I've given Bill and Steve a hard time a few times, and they're a lot of fun. So,
well, wonderful. Well, this has been a lot of fun, regardless. Well, do you have a sign off? Like, I think it's just.
No, I just usually say bye to everybody. The next stream will be the last Sunday of the month again, as usual. And next time, I think what we're going to do is our special guest star is going to be Ethan, who's behind me, if you would like to wave, dear. We are going to be doing our topic is going to be cocktail chemistry, but how all the different ways we've turned plants into booze, while Ethan does a little cocktail workshop talk for all you guys. And
Phytologist episode.
A very drunk phytologist episode. And we're going to back to our roots. And so whatever different cocktails that he's working on, I'm going to talk about the plants involved in making them, right? As well as the different processes and stuff like that, as well as enjoying the drinks that he makes me. So.
Yeah, no, I'm sure you're gonna have a few drinks, which will be. I'm excited to see that. I know what you like when you've had a few drinks in you. That's a lot of fun.
Thanks, dear. I appreciate you. Embarrassing me in front of the internet.
Oh, come on. Your stream is literally drink and think.
I know.
But I was gonna say, if you ever do want me have me on again, I would love to. I had a ton of fun.
Awesome. I'm glad.
Yes. But I guess we'll sign off for now then.
All right. Goodbye, everybody. I'll see you next month.
Bye-bye, buddy.
Bye.
Bye.